the stories. Phone recording documented their final minutes. The file that surfaced last winter was short and brutal, and local dispatch confirmed the voices matched a missing maintenance pair. Greta Lyle, 32, a small-town reporter, listened 3 times before writing anything because the last minute hid everything important. Greta lived in a valley where the hills felt close and the roads curled between pines that ate cell bars after mile 6. Her editor wanted a follow-up on the county's mothballed call boxes, and she planned a simple piece about budgets and weathered steel. The plan changed when a man left a padded envelope at the office desk, and the receptionist slid it toward Greta. Inside lay a cheap thumb drive and a handwritten note that said, "Play it now," which was not exactly subtle guidance. The audio began with tires crushing wet grit and a fan belt squeal, then a breathy laugh that carried a little nervous catch. A woman said, "Hit record anyway," and a man replied, "We will just send it to Burgess later," and gravel pinged the undercarriage. Greta paused there and rewound because archived calls mentioned a supply clerk named Burgess, and the tone was easy routine. Dispatch had logged their crew leaving the yard after lunch, and the destination was a ranger turnout near a decommissioned radio tower. The county named them as Mara Keene, 29, and Colby Ash, 33. Both contract road technicians paid hourly wages. They were fixing marker posts along a flood reroute where tourists kept missing the detour, according to a memo Greta later obtained. She kept a yellow notebook, and she recorded exact timestamps straight from the audio, then cross-matched with the dispatch exit time. Static rose and fell like weak FM, which fit a corridor where the timber wall trapped signals, something locals complain about every spring. The woman on the file spoke again, and her voice changed colors like people do when they feel watched, but pretend they do not. "Do you see that cone?" she asked, and the man said, "Not our brand." Then the truck door chirped, then another small, impatient silence. 2 clicks sounded like metal against plastic, which Greta later matched to the folding rod used to set reflective stakes at bends. A train horn cried far away with 2 short blasts, then 1, and Greta wrote that pattern down and circled it 3 times. A witness told her a freight line hugs the river, and the drainage there creates its own echo that stacks horns out strangely. If the pattern matched that schedule, she could place the recording on a map within minutes, which is all any timeline really needs. At 23 minutes in, a male voice new to the scene drifted across the microphone, thin and half-carried by the wind. "You folks need a hookup," he said. And a second voice we never hear again muttered something that sounded like numbers and road letters. Greta paused again and wrote an underline under the word hookup because that is tow slang, and Colby worked nights at an actual wrecker. He would not pay cash for a roadside pull unless something felt wrong, and the county did not call contractors to rescue their own truck. Colby said, "We are good," and the stranger answered, "Road is closed ahead," which matched a rumor about impassable washouts that week. Greta called the county shop and asked about the washouts, and a foreman said the road was soft but open with flagged cones. The file captured an engine idling close, and a beeper chirped 3 times, the exact rhythm used by older reverse alarms on flatbeds. A chain clinked against a bumper, and the woman whispered, "We should go." Then the phone scuffed fabric as someone reset their grip. Greta listened to that fabric sound again and again because the microphone scraped a zipper, which gave brand and suggested jacket style. She went to the surplus store and found county-issued windbreakers with chunky metal pulls that rasp exactly like the noise at 19. The envelope had no return address, but courier records put it at a copy shop where a camera watched the counter until closing time. The clerk remembered a man with a field jacket and a gray cap, and he bought a single USB stick with cash and no receipt. Greta did not print that part, and she did not share it with anyone besides her editor, because he asked for caution and patience. Instead, she drove the turnout on a weekday afternoon and brought a friend who knew rail schedules, then they listened at the shoulder. The freight line sang through the ravine, and the horn called twice, then once, and the echo folded back with the same aching cadence. She drew a circle over the map where that sound best fit, then paced off the shoulder and found a rut that bit deep and straight. Down the slope, hidden by alder, lay an abandoned callbox faceplate with new screws driven into old holes, clean and too shiny. The county had removed the boxes after a storm in 2019, and crews reported salvage thieves yanking wire for quick cash. Greta photographed the screws and the plate, then noted fresh shoe prints with a square heel that looked like a hardware store special. Her phone had no bars, so she returned to town and requested traffic camera pulls for the nearest intersection where coverage still worked. A state tech sent stills from a ridge camera that framed taillights heading toward the turnout after midday in a light, steady rain. One frame showed a retired tow truck with faded lettering, and the next showed the county pickup tucked behind it like a shy cousin. Greta played the audio again and caught a faint double click at 29, the sound of a handheld radio powering and squelching. That detail mattered because the county monitors one frequency while tow outfits use another, and she recognized the wrong hiss entirely. She interviewed a grocery clerk who stocked drinks near the bin of hand warmers, and he remembered selling 2 sleeves to a road tech. The receipt time sat within 10 minutes of the exit log, and his detail about the jacket patch matched the issued windbreakers perfectly. A bartender at the junction recalled a flatbed guy bragging about his old badge from a volunteer rescue club that folded years ago. He liked to flash it to get lanes cleared, and he kept a coil of chain in the cab, and he always smelled like 2 cycle gas. Greta ran the plate fragments from the ridge stills through a spreadsheet of county surplus auctions, and one number set rang familiar. A retired truck had been sold to a seasonal contractor 5 years back, and that contractor worked grading crews through 3 winters. She asked the yard boss for copies of work orders and found add-ons for road closures that never reached the public board for posting. 3 were billed to a line called Emergency Barricade Verification, which can pass quiet if everyone is cold and trying to go home. Greta returned to the file and let the final minute run without a pause, and the sound tightened like a knot being cinched hard. "Back it down," said the stranger, and another voice said, "Winch." Then the engine strained, then the woman whispered, "No, wait, please." Her phone captured boots on gravel and a hollow shutter like a box panel being struck by a fist, then a clatter of chains settling again. Colby said, "We are leaving," and the stranger replied, "Road is closed." Then something metallic squealed, and the microphone hit the seat. Greta recognized the squeal later when a mechanic showed her a retired foot brake on that model, which locks if someone yanks hard. A second engine revved and then drifted away, and the train horn cried again, which pinned the window tighter than any wristwatch could. The file ended with water, sound, and wind, and then a barely audible sentence that a lab enhanced for the sheriff before the case closed. A female voice whispered, "He is not alone," which fits the bartender's story, and one traffic still that shows a second vehicle tailing the flatbed. Greta never wrote the name of the contractor who later died in a solo wreck on a dirt connector above the timber line in early spring. The county cited the company for unpermitted closure devices, and a civil suit settled quietly after an insurance review and sealed filings. The recording was cited in the settlement as contemporaneous documentation, which means the phone created a timeline that prosecutors trust completely. It helped link unreported cones, a counterfeit callbox faceplate, and an old truck beeper that chirped a signature 3-note pattern. Greta visited the turnout one more time when the snow melted, and she stood where the ruts cut dark through the alder roots. She listened for horns and for chain, and she watched the waterline move, and she wrote names she would never print anywhere. A retired dispatcher took her call and confirmed that a training tape from 2015 uses the same 3 beeper chirps. It teaches rookies to ignore unauthorized closures unless a county badge verifies, because anyone can buy cones and a safety vest. Greta asked him what he remembered most from long nights watching a map blink, and he said mistakes always make more sound than luck. He said a good tech marks those sounds. Then he asked if she could hear her own pencil scratching when she replayed the last minute. She told him yes, and she told him about the zipper scrape that matched the metal pull, and he laughed, then he went quiet. He said that noise meant the person tried to pocket the phone without breaking the recording, which is a trick dispatchers teach. The bartender called once more and said a woman had started bringing flowers to the turnout, and she left them at the alder cut. He asked if Greta thought the woman was family, and Greta said she did not know and that strangers honor strangers more than most. The editor killed 2 paragraphs about the towing club because it would invite noise, and he preferred the clean arc of small clues. Greta agreed, because the point was not a club or a badge or a wreck, but the way ordinary objects built a clear end. She listened one last time and heard something she had missed, which happens when minds want answers and forget to trust the quiet. The very first second carried a shy sigh like people make when they press record and pretend they are not scared of new evidence. Greta printed that detail and moved it near the top, and she explained that simple acts create proof that survives strangers and storms. She never used the word hero, and she never used wild language, and she left the title to her editor, who kept things plain. When the story ran, the county announced a permanent fund for roadside beacons that log closures to a public map without excuses. Visitors call it the green light board, and techs call it the quiet wall, and the valley calls it the keen rule. Greta keeps the thumb drive in a small drawer, and she checks the timestamps now and then, and they have not changed. She believes the last decision Mara and Colby made was to document, and that choice laid stepping stones across a very dark place. The valley will always have roads that curl into quiet, and someone will always think cones look official when no one is watching. She writes that the recording made their last minutes heavier than memory, which fades and bends, and lighter than rumor, which never ends. On clear nights, the ravine carries sound like a wire, and 2 short horn calls followed by 1 still tag the hour. Greta parks on the shoulder, keeps her phone in her pocket, and lets the quiet work without her voice explaining every piece. The story of the thumb drive is not about a monster in the trees or a curse pinned to bad weather. It is about a phone and a breath, and the way background noises can draw a map that people can follow later. She ends notes with a sentence she never printed, because printed promises feel heavier than memory deserves when strangers are gone. Someone pressed record, and someone stayed brave for long enough, and the evidence they made did not let the valley forget.
A ghost ship drifted into port with a fresh meal on the stove. It was the winter of 1987 when the fishing trawler Marianne V slipped silently into the harbor of Gloucester, Massachusetts, just before dawn on a brittle February morning. No lights flickered from her deck, no voices called out, no radio signals preceded her arrival. She came like a shadow drifting through fog, her bow nudging gently against Pier 6 as if guided by unseen hands. The first to notice her was Elias Thorne, a weathered dockhand with 40 years of salt in his bones and frost still clinging to the brim of his wool cap. He'd arrived early to check lobster traps, steam rising from his coffee cup curling into the pale gray sky. When he saw the vessel listing slightly, paint peeling like old skin, name barely legible beneath grime, he froze. His breath caught, not from cold, but from instinct. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Elias approached slowly, boots crunching over frozen patches of seaweed and ice. The Marianne V had been reported missing 3 weeks prior, last seen off the Georges Bank during a sudden nor'easter that had swallowed 2 other boats whole. The Coast Guard had called off search efforts after 10 days, assuming all hands lost, and yet here she was, intact, afloat, and strangely, undisturbed. No signs of storm damage, no gaping holes in the hull, nothing overturned on deck, just silence. A thick, suffocating silence that pressed against Elias's ears like cotton. He called out once, twice, no answer. Then, steeling himself, he climbed aboard. The moment his boot touched the deck, he felt it a chill that wasn't from the wind. It coiled up from the wood beneath him, sharp and unnatural, as though the ship itself were holding its breath. He moved toward the wheelhouse. The door hung open, swaying slightly with the motion of the tide. Inside, the radio crackled with static, a faint loop of Morse code repeating endlessly 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, SOS, over and over, though the power should have been dead. The logbook lay open on the chart table, the last entry dated February 3rd. Heavy fog. Currents erratic. Can't see land. Something in the water. The handwriting grew jagged, frantic, as if written under duress. Elias flipped back a few pages. Earlier entries spoke of routine hauls, calm seas, even jokes about Captain Rourke's terrible stew. But then, around January 28th, the tone shifted. Crew restless. Emery claims he saw lights beneath the surface, not bioluminescence, too steady, too deep. Emery Vale, third mate, quiet man from inland Maine who rarely spoke unless spoken to. He'd joined the crew only 2 months prior, replacing a man who'd quit mid-season, saying the boat felt haunted. Emery hadn't believed in ghosts, or so the others said. But his journal, found later tucked inside a duffel bag below decks, told a different story. Elias descended the narrow metal stairs into the galley, flashlight beam trembling in his grip, and there, on the cast iron stove, sat a pot, still warm. Steam curled lazily from its cracked lid, carrying the scent of onions, potatoes, and something meaty beef, maybe, or pork. A spoon rested against the rim, crusted with congealing gravy. Beside it, a chipped blue mug held tea, long gone cold, but unmistakably brewed that morning. Or the night before. Or whenever. Time didn't seem to matter here. He backed away, heart hammering. No one could have boarded without being seen. The harbor was monitored, no small craft had entered after midnight, and yet the meal was fresh. As if someone had stepped away just seconds ago. Then he heard it. A soft clink. From the mess hall, like a fork tapping a plate. He turned slowly. The door stood ajar. Darkness pooled beyond it. He pushed it open with the toe of his boot. Tables bolted to the floor. Benches intact. Nothing out of place. Except on the farthest table, set for four plates, each with a portion of stew untouched, forks laid neatly beside them, napkins folded, salt and pepper shakers aligned perfectly. And at the head of the table, a fifth plate. Empty. But the chair was pulled out. As if someone had just risen. Elias didn't scream, he didn't run, he simply stood there, flashlight shaking, breath coming in short white puffs, until the sound came, again not a clink this time, but a whisper, faint, guttural, from the sleeping quarters below. He didn't go down, not then. He scrambled back onto the pier, shouting for help, voice raw with panic. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, the pot on the stove was cold, the steam had vanished. But the stew remained, uneaten, perfectly preserved, as if time had paused mid-bite. Captain Silas Rourke, grizzled veteran of 30 seasons at sea, was never found. Nor were his 3 crewmen, Emery Vale, Harlan Pike, and Jocelyn Crow, the youngest at 23, who'd signed on to save money for nursing school in Portland. Their personal effects were still in their bunks. Photos of family, letters half-written, toothbrushes damp. But no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, just absence. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. Divers scoured the hull, sonar scanned the seabed, forensic teams analyzed the stew, confirmed it contained beef, carrots, and barley, cooked within hours of the ship's arrival. No toxins, no hallucinogens, nothing abnormal. Yet every sailor who boarded the Marianne V afterward reported the same thing. The smell of cooking food, even when the stove was cold, the sensation of being watched from empty rooms, whispers in low, guttural tones, always just beyond hearing. One junior officer, Lyle Mander, claimed he saw Emery Vale standing at the railing at 3:17 in the morning, staring into the fog, mouthing words he couldn't understand. When approached, the figure dissolved like mist. The ship was towed to dry dock, declared unsalvageable not due to structural damage, but because morale among crews plummeted. Men refused to work on her. Mechanics reported tools going missing, only to reappear in locked lockers. Electricians swore lights turned on by themselves, dim and flickering, casting long shadows that moved against the walls. By April, the decision was made. The Marianne V would be scuttled, sunk in deep water beyond the continental shelf, where currents would carry her far from shipping lanes. The ceremony was brief. No flags, no speeches, just a single flare shot into the twilight sky as charges detonated along her keel. She sank slowly, bow first, vanishing beneath the waves with an almost ceremonial grace. But here's what they didn't report, what never made the official logs. 3 days later, a Norwegian freighter, the Fjordwind, radioed the Boston Maritime Authority from 50 miles east of Sable Island. They'd spotted wreckage, part of a wooden table, scorched at the edges, floating amid a slick of oil. Attached to it, miraculously preserved in a sealed plastic sleeve, was a page torn from Emery Vale's journal. The handwriting was frantic, ink smudged as if written in haste or fear. "They're not dead. We never left. The ship doesn't sink. It drifts, it waits, it feeds. The stove is always warm, the table is always set, and one day it will come back. With a fresh meal. For us." The page was authenticated, handwriting matched samples from Emery's personnel file, ink consistent with pens issued to crew, but how it survived explosion, fire, and ocean pressure, no scientist could explain. And then, on the evening of December 9th, 2012, a local fisherman named Corwin Haskins reported seeing a vessel matching the Marianne V's description near Jeffrey's Ledge. Fog was heavy that night, visibility near zero. He claimed the ship passed within 20 feet of his boat, lights dark, decks empty. But from her galley window, a yellow glow pulsed like a stove lit below. He tried hailing her, no response. When he turned to grab his radio, she was gone. Vanished into the mist. No wreckage was found, no trace on radar. The Coast Guard dismissed it as a mirage, a trick of the light. But Corwin insisted, said he smelled stew in the air, beef, carrots, barley, and underneath something darker, metallic, like blood. To this day, Gloucester fishermen avoid that stretch of water after sunset, especially in winter, especially when the fog rolls in thick and silent. Some say if you listen closely on still nights, you can hear the Morse code 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots echoing from beneath the waves. Others claim to see a faint glow beneath the surface, drifting with the current like a lantern in the deep. And every year, around February 10th, a single bouquet of wilted wildflowers appears on the railing of Pier 6. No note, no signature. Just flowers brown at the edges, salt stiffened, as if carried across the sea. Left there, some say, by someone who never came home. But perhaps the most unsettling detail, the one that lingers in the mind long after the story ends, is this. When authorities finally cleaned out the galley before scuttling the ship, they found something odd in the cupboard. A can of stew. Store-bought, label faded, best before date, October 12th, 1986. Expired over a year earlier, yet the can was warm to the touch. And when opened, it was full. Steaming. Fresh. As if just heated. No one ate it. It was incinerated along with the rest. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right through the rigging of moored boats, people swear they can smell it, that rich, savory aroma. Onions, potatoes, meat slow-cooked for hours. And they wonder, who was it meant for? And more importantly, is the table still set? The sea keeps its secrets well, but every now and then, it returns them to drift into port, unannounced, uninvited, with a fresh meal on the stove and chairs waiting to be filled. So the next time you walk past an empty dock and the wind carries the faint scent of cooking food, ask yourself, was that the neighbor's dinner? Or something else? Something older? Something hungrier? Something that remembers your name and knows when you'll be home? Ohio's Vanishing Room legend turned out to be a crime scene. In the quiet, rolling hills of southeastern Ohio, where the trees grow thick and the fog clings to the valley long after sunrise, there stands an old farmhouse just off State Route 327 near the unincorporated community of Gloucester. The structure, weathered by decades of wind and rain, has stood vacant since the late 1980s, its windows shattered, its roof sagging under the weight of time. Locals have long avoided it, not out of mere disrepair, but because of a story whispered in hushed tones at county fairs and over coffee at roadside diners. They call it the Vanishing Room, a place said to swallow people whole, never to be seen again. For years, it was dismissed as folklore, a ghost tale spun to scare children from wandering too far into the woods. But in the autumn of 2017, when a young man named Thaddeus Mallory disappeared without a trace, the legend took a chilling turn, because what investigators found behind those crumbling walls wasn't a myth, it was a crime scene. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was on a crisp morning in early October, the kind where the air smells faintly of damp leaves and wood smoke curls from distant chimneys, that Sheriff Elias Crane received the call. A missing person report had been filed by the elderly aunt of Thaddeus Mallory, a 23-year-old aspiring photographer from Athens, Ohio. Thaddeus had told her he was going to explore some abandoned properties for a photo series titled Forgotten Corners. His last known message, sent via text at 6:47 in the evening on October 3rd, read, "Found something strange at the Gloucester house. The back room doesn't match the floor plan. Walls feel wrong." Then, silence. Sheriff Crane, a man with 31 years on the force and a face lined by both sun and sorrow, knew the Gloucester house by reputation only. He'd heard the stories of hikers who claimed they entered the house and exited miles away, of teenagers who swore they saw a door where none should be, opening into a space that defied logic. But he was a practical man, grounded in evidence, not superstition. Still, when no sign of Thaddeus turned up after 2 days, not at his apartment, not at his favorite diner, not even on surveillance footage from the gas station on Route 59, he ordered a search of the property. The team arrived just after dawn on October 6th, their breath visible in the pale light. The house loomed ahead, surrounded by knee-high weeds and rusted farm equipment half swallowed by the earth. Deputy Marlowe, a rookie with nerves tighter than a snare drum, led the way, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. The front door groaned open with a sound like a dying animal, releasing a wave of cold, stale air that carried the scent of mildew and something sharper, something metallic. Inside, the house was eerily intact. Dust coated every surface, but there were no signs of forced entry, no broken furniture, no struggle. It was as if time had simply stopped. Photographs still hung crooked on the walls, a calendar from 1986 frozen on the month of July. Sheriff Crane moved through the kitchen, then the parlor, calling out Thaddeus's name, his voice echoing through the hollow rooms. Nothing answered. Then they reached the hallway. It was here that things began to feel off. The corridor seemed longer than it should have been, stretching farther than the exterior walls allowed. The floorboards creaked unevenly, and the wallpaper, once floral, now peeling in long strips, pulsed faintly in the draft, as though breathing. Deputy Marlowe paused, turning to the sheriff. "Sir, did we pass that door before?" he asked, pointing to a narrow paneled entrance on the left. Crane frowned. He didn't remember it. They opened it. Beyond lay a small room no more than 10 feet by 12, but everything about it felt unnatural. The ceiling sloped downward at an impossible angle, though the house outside had a flat roof. The walls were covered in crude symbols, drawn in what later tests would confirm as human blood, layered over decades. And in the center of the floor, a circle had been etched into the wood, filled with ash and bone fragments. Most disturbing of all, the room had no window, yet a faint greenish light seemed to emanate from the corners, flickering like old television static. Sheriff Crane's radio crackled. "We've got movement on thermal," came the voice of Officer Lyle, stationed outside. "2 figures, inside the house. One near the back hall. The other, sir. The second heat signature is coming from inside the west wall." Crane turned slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the dust. There was no west wall in this room, it faced north. His pulse quickened. He stepped toward the northern wall, pressing his palm against the plaster. It gave slightly, like soft clay. He pushed harder, and his hand sank through. He yanked it back with a gasp. The hole sealed itself instantly, leaving no mark. "This isn't possible," Marlowe whispered, backing away. "This isn't real." But it was real. And worse, it was occupied. Later analysis would reveal traces of DMT and other hallucinogenic compounds in the air, suggesting someone had been burning psychoactive substances to induce altered states. But forensic teams also uncovered human remains buried beneath the floorboards, 3 sets of bones, carbon dated to the 1970s, 80s, and early 2000s. Dental records confirmed one belonged to a woman named Elspeth Vaughan, reported missing in 1979 after telling friends she was investigating a doorway to another place in rural Ohio. And then there was Thaddeus. On October 9th, during a second sweep of the property, K-9 Unit Officer Renata Cho discovered a trapdoor hidden beneath a collapsed section of the basement. Behind it, a narrow tunnel descended into darkness. The walls were lined with photographs, dozens of them taken inside the vanishing room. Faces stared out from the images, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. Among them was Thaddeus, captured mid-stride, unaware, seconds before vanishing from the known world. At the end of the tunnel, they found him, not alive. Not exactly. His body was seated upright, propped against the stone wall, dressed in the same clothes he'd worn the night he disappeared. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were open, pupils dilated, fixed on a point beyond the ceiling. In his lap lay a leather-bound journal filled with frantic handwriting, sketches of shifting corridors, spiraling staircases leading nowhere, and repeated phrases, "It watches, it learns. It remembers names." The final entry, dated October 4th, just one day after his last text read, "I think I'm still here. I think I never left. But something else is wearing my face now." If you find this, don't go back, don't look for the door, it knows you're looking, it's always listening. The case was officially closed in March of 2018. Authorities cited homicide, though no suspect was ever identified. The house was condemned and scheduled for demolition, but crews refused to touch it. Dynamite placed at the foundation failed to detonate. Bulldozers stalled mid-approach, engines dead despite full tanks. Eventually, the state erected a chain-link fence around the property, topped with barbed wire, and posted warning signs, "No trespassing, hazardous structure." Yet, even now, nearly 7 years later, locals report seeing lights in the windows on foggy nights. Hunters claim to hear whispers drifting through the trees, voices calling names of people who've never been to Gloucester. And sometimes, on the edge of sleep, residents swear they feel a pressure behind their eyes, a sensation of being pulled not forward, but sideways, into a space that shouldn't exist. The vanishing room, it seems, is not done, and perhaps it never will be. Because legends don't die in places like Ohio. They wait, they breathe, they grow hungry. And they remember. Thaddeus Mallory was not the first. He certainly won't be the last. So the next time you drive down a lonely road, past a house that looks just a little too still, a little too quiet, ask yourself, does the layout make sense? Do the doors line up? And when you pass by, do you feel, just for a second, as though the air has thickened and something on the other side of the wall has noticed you? Be careful. Some rooms don't let go. Some doors only open one way. And some houses, like the one near Gloucester, standing sentinel in the mist, don't just hold secrets, they feed on them. The investigation remained open for months, though leads dried up faster than puddles in summer heat. Psychologists analyzed Thaddeus's journal, concluding he likely suffered a psychotic break induced by toxins or isolation. Skeptics pointed to mold, carbon monoxide, or underground gas leaks as explanations for the hallucinations, but none could explain the photos. None could explain how his body appeared untouched by decay, preserved in a state that defied medical understanding. And no scientist could replicate the phenomenon of the shifting walls, the impossible geometry, the way the room seemed to exist outside normal dimensions. Dr. Corvin Hexton, a parapsychologist from Case Western Reserve University, visited the site in May of 2018. He brought with him electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and a team of graduate students. They spent 3 days collecting data. On the evening of the third day, Hexton entered the vanishing room alone, determined to meditate and record any anomalies. He never came out. Search parties combed the area for weeks. His equipment was found scattered near the basement entrance, cameras smashed, notebooks burned, audio recorders filled with static, and, at one point, a whisper in Hexton's voice, "It showed me the others." They're still walking. They don't know they're dead. After that, the state declared the property off-limits indefinitely. The fence was reinforced, motion sensors installed, helicopter flyovers increased. But still, the stories persist. In 2022, a drone operated by a storm chaser caught footage of the house during a thunderstorm. In one frame, clear, undeniable, the back door opens. A figure steps out. Tall, thin, wearing a coat that flaps in a wind no one else feels. The face is blurred, distorted, as if reality itself refuses to focus on it, and in its hand, it holds a camera. Thaddeus's camera. The video went viral, then vanished from the internet within hours, pulled by unknown authorities. The storm chaser claimed he received a visit from men in dark suits who said nothing, only handed him a sealed envelope and left. Inside was a single photograph, his own face, taken from inside his bedroom sometime during the night. No one believes him, but those who've studied the vanishing room know the truth. It doesn't just take people, it replaces them. And the ones who come back aren't really back at all. They're echoes. Echoes with instructions. Now consider this. When you walk through your home, do you count the doors? Do you notice if the hallway feels longer today than it did yesterday? Have you ever stood in a room and thought just for a moment that the walls leaned in slightly as if listening? Because somewhere, deep in the heart of Ohio, a room waits. A room with no right to exist. A room that remembers every footstep, every breath, every name spoken within its walls. And if you listen closely, on the very edge of silence, you might hear it. Not a creak, not the wind, but a whisper calling yours. The urban legend that locals swear is real and won't talk about at night. In the hollowed hills of northern West Virginia, where the trees grow thick and the valleys swallow sound like secrets never meant to be spoken, there's a stretch of road locals avoid after sundown. Not because it's dangerous in the usual way, no sharp curves, no history of accidents, but because something walks there, something that doesn't belong. The road is called Hollow Creek Lane, winding through the unincorporated township of Gormley Mills, a place so small it doesn't appear on most maps, and so quiet that even birds seem reluctant to sing past twilight. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was late autumn in the year 1987 when the first official report came in, not to the sheriff's office, but whispered between neighbors over cracked porcelain cups of black coffee. A woman by the name of Thalia Mercer, who lived alone in a weather-worn clapboard house just off Hollow Creek Lane, claimed she saw a figure standing at the edge of her cornfield one evening. She said it wasn't tall, not exactly, but wrung its limbs too long, its head tilted at an angle that made her stomach twist. It didn't move, didn't blink. Just stood there, facing her porch, as if waiting for an invitation she had no intention of giving. Thalia was known in Gormley Mills as a practical woman church every Sunday, grew her own vegetables, kept a loaded 38 inches her nightstand since her husband passed in '69. So when she called Sheriff Harlan Voss 3 nights later, voice trembling like a plucked wire, he listened. He arrived with his flashlight cutting through the fog, boots crunching on frost-laced gravel. The house was dark except for a single lamp glowing behind the kitchen curtain. Thalia met him at the door, wrapped in a faded quilt, eyes wide and bloodshot. "It's back," she whispered. "Same spot, in the field." They walked together toward the edge of the property, the beam of the flashlight slicing through the mist. Nothing moved, no footprints in the damp soil, no snapped branches or disturbed earth. Just silence, thick and heavy, like wool pressed against the ears. Then, from somewhere deep in the corn rows, a sound. A low, wet clicking, like stones being rolled in oil. Sheriff Voss aimed the light, the stalks swayed slightly, though there was no wind, and then nothing. The sound stopped. The air stilled. They stood there for nearly 10 minutes, neither speaking, both feeling watched. Sheriff Voss told Thalia to stay indoors, lock the doors, and call him if anything changed. He drove away slowly, scanning the rearview mirror until the house disappeared behind the trees. He filed a report the next morning, possible hallucination due to stress or sleep deprivation, but privately he marked a note in his personal ledger, Hollow Creek, November 3rd, Thalia Mercer. Heard something, felt something, can't explain. That winter was harsh, long stretches of snow, power outages, roads blocked for days. But people in Gormley Mills noticed other things too. Dogs refused to go into backyards after dark. Chickens vanished without signs of struggle. And on still nights, when the moon hung low and yellow, some swore they heard voices calling from the woods, voices that didn't sound human. Children were kept inside after 6, porch lights stayed on all night. Conversations about Hollow Creek Lane ended quickly, often with a shake of the head and a muttered phrase, "Best not talk about it." Then, in early spring of 1988, a teenager named Corwin Bellwether went missing. He was 16, lanky, with a stutter he'd been trying to overcome since childhood. Corwin liked to walk at night, said it helped him think. His mother, Elspeth, would beg him not to go down Hollow Creek Lane, but he always shrugged and said, "Nothing out there but trees and dirt." On the night of March 14th, He left after dinner with a notebook in his pocket, claiming he was writing poetry for school. He never came back. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. Bloodhounds picked up his scent near the creek bed, then lost it abruptly, as if he'd stepped off the face of the earth. A week later, his boots were found placed neatly side by side at the base of an old sycamore, roots tangled like knuckles. No body, no blood, no explanation. The official cause of disappearance? Presumed runaway. But in Gormley Mills, folks knew better. They looked at each other in church pews, eyes shadowed, lips tight. They didn't say much. But they stopped walking that road entirely. Years passed, the story faded mostly. New families moved into the valley, drawn by cheap land and quiet living. They laughed at the old tales. Ghosts, they'd say. Come on. But then, little things started happening. Lights flickering in empty rooms, cold spots in hallways. One woman, Miriam Huxley, claimed she saw a figure in her bathroom mirror one night, a man with sunken eyes and a mouth sewn shut with black thread. She screamed, turned on the light, and it was gone. The next morning, she found a single muddy footprint on the linoleum leading from the bathtub to the door, but the windows were locked. The house had no basement access. In 2005, a documentary crew from Pittsburgh arrived, determined to debunk the myth. They set up cameras along Hollow Creek Lane, motion sensors, audio recorders. For 2 nights, nothing. On the third, at precisely 2:13 in the morning, every device failed simultaneously. The footage showed only static, but audio captured a whisper, faint at first, then clearer. You're not supposed to see. When the lead technician reviewed the files, he noticed something else. In the background, beneath the static, a rhythmic tapping 3 slow knocks, pause, then 2 quick ones, like a code or a warning. He played it for an elderly resident named Otis Grindle, who'd lived in Gormley Mills his entire life. Otis listened once, turned pale, and said, "That's how they used to signal before the mine collapsed in '49. Only the men trapped underground knew that pattern." He refused to speak another word on the subject. By 2012, Hollow Creek Lane was officially closed. The county put up a rusted gate, chained and padlocked, with a sign that read, "Road closed, no trespassing." But kids still dared each other to go. Teens from nearby towns would drive up on weekends, flashlights in hand, laughing nervously as they approached the gate. Most turned back before reaching the tree line. But a few went further. One such group, in October of 2017, included a boy named Jory Linthwaite. He was 17, curious, raised on horror films and internet creepypastas. He didn't believe in ghosts, he believed in adrenaline. That night, he and 3 friends cut the chain with bolt cutters and slipped through. They brought cameras, a Ouija board, even a EVP recorder. They set up camp near the old sycamore where Corwin's boots were found. At first, it was jokes. Flashlight beams dancing through the trees, mocking whispers. Then, around 1 o'clock, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath came out in thick clouds. Their phones died, one by one. Then the recorder picked up a voice, clear, childlike, but distorted. "Don't look behind you." All 4 spun around. Nothing there. But when they turned back, the Ouija board planchette had moved on its own, spelling "Leave now." They packed up fast. As they ran toward the gate, Jory tripped. His friends thought he'd caught his foot on a root, but when they stopped and turned, Jory wasn't getting up. He was staring into the trees, mouth open, eyes wide with terror. "It's watching," he whispered. "It's smiling." They pulled him up, half dragging him the rest of the way. The chain was intact again, no sign it had ever been cut. Jory didn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he described a face pale, stretched, with too many teeth. He said it stood between the trees, perfectly still, just smiling. And then, in a voice not his own, he said, "It knows my name." After that, the county welded the gate shut, installed surveillance cameras. Within a week, all 4 cameras malfunctioned. Footage showed nothing but snow, even though the night was clear. And in the corner of one frame, barely visible, a shadow tall, thin, with fingers too long to be real, reached slowly toward the lens. To this day, residents of Gormley Mills won't go near Hollow Creek Lane after dark. If you ask them why, they'll change the subject, or give you a look one that says, "You don't want to know." But if you visit in late autumn, when the leaves turn brittle and the wind carries the scent of damp earth and decay, stand at the edge of that road at dusk. Listen, really listen. You might hear the faintest echo of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. You might feel the air thicken, your breath shorten, your skin prickle as if unseen eyes have settled on you. And if you're foolish enough to step past the gate, to walk just a few yards down that cracked asphalt path, you may notice something worse. The silence isn't empty. It's waiting. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the moon hides behind clouds and the world holds its breath, you can hear it breathe back. They say it mimics voices, calls out names in familiar tones, your mother's lullaby, your best friend's laugh, just to lure you deeper. But those who've heard it warn, don't answer, don't turn. Don't even think about looking back. Because once it has your attention, it never lets go. There's a reason the elders in Gormley Mills whisper prayers before bedtime, why parents check their children's windows twice, why on certain nights the entire town seems to go dark at once, as if hiding. It's not superstition, it's survival. And if you find yourself near Hollow Creek Lane when the clock strikes midnight, remember this, the stories aren't legends. They're warnings. And the thing in the woods? It remembers every person who didn't listen. Even now, in the hush between heartbeats, in the space where shadows grow longer than they should, something stirs. Not far, not loud, but close enough to hear you breathe. So tell me again, where are you listening from? And more importantly, are you alone? He robbed banks without saying a word. The note was for police only. In the quiet hours of a late autumn morning, when frost still clung to the sidewalks of suburban Cleveland and the sun had barely risen above the steel-gray rooftops, a man walked into the Huntington National Bank on East 93rd Street with nothing but a folded piece of paper in his hand. It was the year 2013, November the 12th, just past 9 o'clock, and the air inside the bank was warm too, warm filled with the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of coffee from the lobby dispenser. He wore a navy blue windbreaker, unzipped, over a plain gray hoodie, jeans that had seen too many washes, and scuffed work boots. Nothing about him stood out, not his height, not his build, not even the way he moved. Calm, deliberate, silent. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? He approached the second teller window where a woman named Marjorie, her name tag slightly crooked, was counting change into a tray. She looked up, smiled politely, and said, "Good morning. How can I help you?" He didn't return the smile, didn't speak. Instead, he slid the folded note across the counter. Marjorie picked it up, unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the neatly printed words. "This is a robbery. Put $10,000 in this bag. No die packs, no marked bills. I am armed. Do not alert police. This note is for you only. After I leave, call them." Beneath it, a small brown paper sack lay flat, like something from a grocery run. Her fingers trembled, her breath caught. She glanced up. He hadn't moved. His hands were empty, palms down on the counter, but his eyes, they held hers. Not angry, not wild, just steady, cold, like ice over deep water. She nodded once, turned quietly, and began gathering bills from her drawer. 10 stacks of $100 bills. She placed them carefully into the bag, sealed it with a fold, and pushed it back toward him. He took it, slid it under his jacket. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out the front door, disappearing into the pale morning light. No alarm, no shouting, no panic at first. It wasn't until 2 minutes later, when Marjorie finally pressed the silent button beneath her desk, that the chaos began. Police arrived within 4 minutes, officers Reyes and Holloway from the 5th District rolling up in a marked cruiser, lights flashing, but sirens off. By then, the man was gone, vanished. Surveillance footage showed him exiting the bank, adjusting his hood, turning left onto Euclid Avenue, walking at a normal pace, no running, no urgency, before cutting through an alley behind a shuttered laundromat. The camera lost him there. But the note? The note remained, and it would become the thread that unraveled one of the most peculiar bank robbery sprees in modern American history. His name was Thaddeus Vale. Born in 1987 in Youngstown, Ohio, a rusted city where factories once roared but now stood silent, skeletons of steel and brick overtaken by weeds and time, Thaddeus was the son of a mechanic and a school cafeteria worker, raised in a modest bungalow on Glenwood Drive, where the paint peeled in summer and the furnace rattled all winter. He was bright, top of his class at Rayen High, fluent in algebra and physics, could take apart a carburetor and rebuild it blindfolded, but life had a way of bending people in ways they couldn't predict. After high school, he enrolled at Kent State University on a partial scholarship, studying mechanical engineering. But halfway through his sophomore year, his mother fell ill, pancreatic cancer, aggressive and swift. The medical bills piled up, insurance didn't cover everything. Thaddeus dropped out to care for her, working double shifts at a warehouse in Akron, hauling boxes from midnight to dawn. She passed in the spring of 2010, and when she did, something in him cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. He drifted after that, lived in motels with weekly rates, took odd jobs, janitorial work, tree trimming, snow plowing, never stayed in one place longer than a few months. He avoided people, spoke little, read constantly philosophy, criminology, old detective novels, and somewhere in those pages, in the quiet solitude of motel rooms lit by flickering lamps, an idea formed. If banks were machines, then perhaps they could be manipulated like any other mechanism. Clean, precise, no violence, no hostages, just a message, a demand, a transaction. And so, in the fall of 2013, Thaddeus Vale began his campaign. The Huntington robbery was the first, but not the last. 3 days later, on November the 15th, another note appeared, this time at a PNC branch in Parma, Ohio. Same handwriting, same calm, chilling tone, $10,000. In cash. No tricks. I will not harm anyone. But I am armed. Leave the money in the bag, walk away, call police when I'm gone. Again, no words spoken. Again, the teller complied. Again, he vanished. Then, on November the 18th, a third bank, Fifth Third, this time in Medina, same method, same silence, same result. By now, local news had caught wind. Headlines screamed, "Silent Bandit strikes again." Police released grainy stills from security footage back of headshots, blurred faces, a man in a hoodie moving like a shadow between buildings. Task forces were assembled. Detectives pored over maps, timelines, witness statements, but Thaddeus was careful, meticulous. He never used the same route twice, always entered during shift changes, when attention wavered, always chose branches with minimal security presence, and always left the note as his only voice. What made him different wasn't just the silence, it was the precision, the lack of greed. 10,000 each time, never more, never less, no demands for 20s or 50s, always hundreds. Easy to carry, easy to hide, and never once did he threaten a teller beyond the written warning. Never raised his voice, never reached for a weapon, yet every note carried the same phrase, "I am armed." Was he? Police couldn't say for sure. No gun was ever seen, no bulge in his jacket captured on camera, but the words alone were enough. Fear doesn't need a barrel to be real. As the spree continued, 4 banks in 5 weeks, the FBI got involved. Special Agent Lorna Keene, a veteran of the Cleveland Field Office, took point. Sharp-eyed, mid-40s, with a reputation for solving cold cases through patience and pattern recognition, she studied every detail. The notes, the timing, the geography. She noticed something others missed. All the banks were within a 30-mile radius of Cleveland. All were mid-sized branches, not the biggest, not the smallest. All had similar layouts, 2 teller windows near the entrance, security cameras angled slightly downward, no armed guards on duty, and all were robbed between 9:15 and 10 o'clock in the morning, just after opening, before the lunch rush. More telling? Each location was near a public transit line. Bus routes, rail stations, places where a person could disappear into the flow of daily commuters. Agent Keene also studied the handwriting. Not rushed, not scribbled. Carefully printed block letters, evenly spaced, almost typewritten in their consistency, no smudges, no corrections. Whoever wrote these notes had practiced, repeatedly. And then there was the language. I will not harm anyone. That phrase appeared in 3 of the 5 notes. Not typical for a robber. Most threats are vague, aggressive, designed to intimidate. But this sounded almost apologetic, defensive, as if he needed to justify his actions even to himself. Keene leaned back in her chair one evening, the glow of her computer screen casting long shadows across her office. Outside, rain tapped against the window. She stared at the timeline pinned to the wall, 5 red dots marking the banks, connected by thin black lines showing possible escape routes. "He's not a criminal," she murmured. "He's a machine." Her partner, Agent Darnell, looked up from his coffee. "What?" "This isn't random. It's procedural. Every move calculated, every word chosen. He's not trying to get rich. He's trying to prove something." "Prove what?" Keene didn't answer. Not yet. Meanwhile, Thaddeus had moved on. By December the 3rd, he struck again, this time in Elyria, a quiet city west of Cleveland. Another bank, another note, another 10,000. But this time, something changed. The teller, a young man named Calvin, hesitated. He read the note, looked up, saw Thaddeus standing there, motionless. Something in his eyes, maybe the exhaustion, maybe the sorrow, made Calvin pause. Instead of reaching for the money, he wrote a note of his own on a scrap of paper. "Are you okay?" He slid it across the counter. Thaddeus blinked. For the first time in weeks, his expression shifted. Just slightly. A flicker. Confusion. Surprise. He looked at the words, then back at Calvin. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket, not for a weapon, but for a pen. He wrote beneath Calvin's question, "I have to do this. Please, just give me the money." Calvin nodded, fetched the cash, handed it over. And Thaddeus left. But that exchange haunted him. That night, in a dimly lit motel room on Oberlin Road, he sat on the edge of the bed, the stolen money stacked neatly on the dresser. He hadn't spent $1, not one. The bags remained sealed. He hadn't bought food, clothes, shelter, nothing. He opened a notebook, thick, leather-bound, filled with equations, diagrams, lists. On the latest page, he had written, "Objective, $60,000. Purpose, clear debt, restore dignity, end cycle." 60,000. That was the number. The sum of his mother's unpaid medical bills, the balance that had ruined his credit, barred him from loans, kept him from rebuilding. 60,000, and he was halfway there. But now, Calvin's question echoed in his mind. "Are you okay?" No, he wasn't. He hadn't slept through the night in months. Dreams of his mother calling his name from a dark hallway, waking up, sweating, heart pounding. The weight of the lie, the fiction he'd created, pressed on his chest like a stone. He wasn't a monster, but he wasn't innocent either. On December the 9th, he entered a key bank in Lorraine. Same routine, same note, same silence. But as he waited for the teller to gather the money, he noticed something different. A photo on her desk. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, smiling in a yellow dress. Beside it, a small Christmas ornament, handmade, glued on glitter, crooked star on top. His throat tightened. For the first time, he looked around. Really looked. The bank wasn't just a machine, it was full of people. A man in a suit tapping his foot, waiting to deposit a paycheck. An elderly woman struggling with her purse. A janitor mopping the far corner, humming softly. These weren't cogs, they were lives. And he was disrupting them. When the teller handed him the bag, he didn't take it immediately. He stared at it. Then at her. Her name tag read Nadia. She gave a small, nervous nod. He whispered so low, only she could hear, "I'm sorry." Then he turned and walked out. But not far. He didn't go to the alley. Didn't vanish. Instead, he sat on a bench outside a gas station half a block away, the bag at his feet, his head in his hands. 20 minutes later, Officer Reyes, same officer from the first robbery, pulled up, responding to a call about a suspicious person. He recognized the description. Hoodie, windbreaker, sitting still. He approached slowly, hand near his sidearm. "Sir, you all right?" Thaddeus didn't look up. "I robbed 5 banks," he said, voice hollow. "The money's in the bag. I didn't spend it. I want to turn myself in." Reyes froze. "You what?" "I have the notes. Everything. I'll cooperate. Just don't shoot me." And just like that, it was over. Back at the station, Thaddeus was processed quietly. No cuffs at first, no shouting. When Agent Keene entered the interrogation room, she studied him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected," she said. He looked up. "I'm not who I thought I was either." She Saturday, "Why? Why do this?" He exhaled. "To pay my mother's debts, to stop feeling like a failure. I thought if I could fix that one thing, maybe I could start over." And the silence? I didn't want to scare anyone. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Words, they can make things worse. But a note, you can read it, decide how to respond, gives people control. Keen leaned forward. "You wrote, 'I am armed' every time. Were you?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I wasn't. But I knew they'd believe it. Fear works faster than truth." She nodded slowly. "You're smarter than most people who do this. That's why you lasted so long. But not smart enough to know it wouldn't fix anything." "No," she agreed. "Money rarely does." The case made national headlines. The silent bandit surrenders. Note-writing robber claims he just wanted to be free. Some called him a criminal, others a tragic figure. A man broken by a system that offered no second chances. At trial, in March of 2014, Thaddeus pleaded guilty to 5 counts of bank robbery. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and tired eyes, listened to his statement. "I made a choice," he said, voice steady but quiet. "A wrong one. I thought I was correcting a mistake, but I only made another. I accept responsibility. And I apologize to the tellers, to the banks, to everyone I frightened. I'm not asking for mercy, just understanding." The courtroom was silent. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in federal prison, time credited for time served, minimum security, eligible for parole in 3. As he was led away, Agent Keen watched from the back row. Later, she visited him at the Federal Correctional Institution in Elkton. "How are you?" she asked. "Better," he said. "I read, I write, I help teach math to other inmates. I'm thinking." "About what?" "Starting over. Legally. Honestly, maybe becoming a counselor. For people who feel trapped." She smiled faintly. "You'd be good at that." He looked out the window. Snow was falling gently over the yard. "I finally understand," he said. "The note wasn't for the police. It was for me. A way to pretend I wasn't really doing this, to keep my conscience quiet. And now? Now I speak. Even when it hurts." Years passed. Thaddeus was released in the summer of 2017. Found work at a community center in Toledo, tutoring teens in math and science. Slowly rebuilt his life. Paid off the rest of his mother's debts, not with stolen money, but with honest wages. He never robbed another bank. He never needed to. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't to take silence as armor, but to break it and speak.
The stories. Why these ranger station receipts still don't add up. In the fall of 2016, a set of receipts found at a remote ranger station raised more questions than answers. The station sat near a state forest in northern Oregon, surrounded by tall fir trees and steep dirt trails. It was used mostly during summer fire patrols, but in October it was supposed to be empty. Yet someone had been there recently enough to leave coffee stains on the counter and fresh tire tracks outside. The main caretaker that year was a 41-year-old ranger named Ellis Grady. He had worked for the state forestry department for over a decade and was known for being organized. When Ellis went missing for 2 days in early November, his coworkers assumed his truck had broken down on the backroads again. He returned quietly that Wednesday morning, pale and distracted, claiming he had been checking fire cameras deeper in the valley. But when the office assistant filed his expense paperwork, she noticed something strange about his fuel receipts. The dates and amounts didn't match the department's card records. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? At first, no one paid much attention. Rangers often paid for fuel out of pocket and turned in the slips later. But the accounting team flagged the entries because they came from a gas station nearly 70 miles off his assigned patrol route. The receipts were time-stamped 2 nights before he returned, right around the time he was unreachable by radio. The manager called him in for a short meeting, but Ellis brushed it off, saying he must have grabbed the wrong slips. Then he went back to work like nothing had happened. 2 weeks later, the night duty ranger stopped at the same outpost and noticed the door unlocked. Inside, lights were on, and someone had clearly been there. Coffee was still warm in the mug, and a jacket hung on the hook near the door. A few papers sat on the counter, pinned under a half-eaten granola bar. When the ranger flipped one over, he saw a receipt from the same station near the coast, dated that very day. It had Ellis's signature at the bottom. When questioned again, Ellis looked shaken. He admitted he had been there that morning, but claimed he just liked driving the scenic route to clear his head. His supervisor didn't find that convincing. The ranger station wasn't even close to the coastal highway. The dirt road leading there was partially blocked by fallen branches from the last storm, and no patrol had been assigned west of the ridge in weeks. Later, one of the younger rangers named Lydia found Ellis's old logbook. Inside, the last few pages were torn out. The remaining entries mentioned several trips out to check Tower 17, a decommissioned lookout on a ridge above an old mining road. That tower had been boarded up for years after a small landslide shifted the foundation. Nobody was supposed to go near it, but the receipts, when mapped, showed a pattern leading right in that direction. In December, a state audit began. Investigators collected the receipts and compared timestamps with the department's truck GPS logs. The logs confirmed that Ellis's vehicle had gone off-route 3 times in late October. Each time, he stayed parked in the same area for several hours. No maintenance work or inspections had been scheduled there. When the auditors interviewed Ellis, he denied staying overnight and insisted the logs were inaccurate. Still, his supervisor noticed the smell of mildew and campfire smoke on his jacket, as if he had been sleeping outdoors. A retired ranger named Hal, who used to work those trails, came forward after hearing rumors. He told the auditors that Tower 17 wasn't completely empty. Inside the storage room below the lookout floor, there were boxes of old survey records and equipment, some of which had been used decades earlier to mark water boundaries. He said if anyone wanted to hide something out there, it would go unnoticed for months. That prompted a small search. 2 rangers and a deputy hiked up to the ridge on a mild January morning. They found tire tracks that matched the department vehicle and a flattened patch of grass behind the tower. Inside, they found the storage boxes Hal mentioned. Most were filled with faded maps and water samples sealed in glass jars. But under one box was a torn envelope containing several small gas receipts folded together. Each had Ellis's handwriting and the same coastal gas station stamp. When Ellis was told about this discovery, he reportedly said, "Then someone's messing with me." He claimed he had never been inside that tower and suggested maybe someone else had used his name. But handwriting experts later confirmed that the signatures were consistent with his previous expense forms. It wasn't conclusive evidence of wrongdoing, but it didn't make sense either. The total fuel listed on those receipts was more than his truck could even hold. The Forest Department quietly placed Ellis on leave while they continued looking into what he was doing on those off-route trips. They interviewed people from nearby towns, asking if anyone had seen a white government pickup in late October. A mechanic from a service station 20 miles south recalled a man in a ranger uniform buying fuel from a portable drum around that time. He couldn't be sure it was Ellis, but he remembered the guy paid cash and seemed in a hurry. By early spring, the case went cold. The department moved on, Ellis resigned, and the receipts were boxed up with the rest of the audit files. But in 2019, a new ranger named Theo discovered something while clearing out the same outpost. He found a metal coffee tin hidden behind a loose board under the counter. Inside were several folded papers, damp but legible. They were fuel receipts again, all from that same coastal station. The latest date was November 3rd, 2016, the night Ellis had gone missing. Each receipt had strange notes scribbled on the back. One read, "No radio past ridge." Another said, "3 lights south of tower." The handwriting matched Ellis's older logs. The department contacted him again, but he refused to comment. A few weeks later, he reportedly moved to Montana and stopped responding to emails. Since then, the receipts have been filed in the regional archive. Some employees still talk about the case, mostly as a cautionary tale. Every few years, new staff find copies during routine checks and bring them up again, wondering what he was doing out there. The gas station itself closed down in 2017, so no new records could be verified. The old cashier who worked there remembered a quiet man in uniform coming in several times that fall, always after midnight, always buying coffee and fuel, never talking much. No criminal charges were ever filed. The department concluded there wasn't enough evidence to prove misconduct, only inconsistencies in the paperwork. Yet to this day, those ranger station receipts still don't add up. Some say Ellis was running a side job with off-book fuel sales. Others think he was covering up something that happened near that old tower. But whatever the truth was, it remains buried somewhere in the hills beyond the ridge, where the radios still go silent and the trail signs fade away each winter.
Missing 411, vanished in broad daylight 20 feet from family. On a crisp October afternoon in the year 1997, beneath a sky of pale blue streaked with wisps of cloud like torn lace, the small town of Pine Hollow, nestled in the rugged folds of northern Idaho, seemed untouched by urgency or fear. The air carried the faint scent of pine resin and damp earth, remnants of an early morning frost that had melted under the sun's gentle gaze. Children played near the edge of the woods behind their homes, their laughter echoing across open fields where goldenrod swayed in the breeze. It was one of those rare autumn days when time felt suspended, when even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? At precisely 3:28 in the afternoon on the 14th day of October, 1997, Elias Thornwood, a quiet boy of 9 years old, with eyes the color of storm clouds and hair so dark it almost swallowed the light, vanished without a sound. He wasn't taken from a dark alley, nor snatched during a thunderstorm, nor lured into the shadows by a stranger with hollow promises. No, he disappeared in broad daylight, just 20 feet from where his family stood, gathered in their backyard for a simple Sunday gathering. The Thornwoods lived in a modest 2-story cedar house at the end of Hemlock Lane, a gravel road fringed by towering pines and thick underbrush. Their property backed onto the dense expanse of the Bitterroot National Forest, where deer trails wound through ferns and fallen logs, and silence often pressed against the ears like cotton. That day, Elias's grandmother, Margaret, had come down from Missoula to visit. His father, Harlan, a mechanic with calloused hands and a voice like gravel rolling in a tin can, was grilling bratwurst over a charcoal fire. His mother, Lila, wore her favorite lavender apron and stirred a pot of apple cider spiced with cinnamon and cloves. His older sister, Cora, then 11, sat cross-legged on a patch of grass, braiding daisies into a crown while humming an old folk tune passed down from her great-aunt. Elias had been playing hide-and-seek with the neighbor's son, Joran Pike, a wiry boy with freckles scattered across his nose like pepper. They'd agreed on boundaries, the fence line, the old oak tree with the tire swing, and the edge of the woods, which both parents had strictly forbidden them from crossing. Not beyond the stump, Harlan had said earlier, pointing to a moss-covered log half buried in ivy. That forest doesn't forgive mistakes. It was just after 3 o'clock when Joran ducked behind the woodpile near the garage, giggling as Elias counted aloud, his back pressed against the cherry tree in the center of the yard. 10, 9, 8. His voice rang clear and bright. Birds chirped in the hedges. A dog barked somewhere down the lane. The world felt safe, predictable. When Elias reached 0, he turned, scanned the yard, and called out, "Ready or not?" He found Joran quickly, bursting from behind the logs with a triumphant whoop. Then came the next round. This time, Elias hid. He darted toward the far side of the yard, near the rusted garden shed where tomato vines curled around broken trellises. He crouched low, pressing himself into the shadow of the wall, heart thudding with excitement. The plan was simple. He would stay hidden until Joran gave up and called his name. But he never emerged. 3:28. That's when Cora first noticed. She looked up from her flower crown, squinting across the lawn. "Where's Elias?" She asked, her voice light at first, tinged only with mild curiosity. No one answered immediately. Harlan flipped a sausage with tongs. Lila poured cider into mugs. Margaret rocked gently in the folding chair, knitting needles clicking. "Elias?" Cora called again, louder this time. Still nothing. Joran frowned. "He was right here. I saw him go behind the shed." Harlan set the tongs down. "Elias, enough hiding now." Silence. Then, movement, a flicker of unease passing between the adults like a cold draft under a door. Lila wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the shed, her steps quickening. "Elias? Sweetheart, come out. Dinner's ready." She peered around the corner. Nothing. Just a scattering of fallen leaves and a single red sneaker lying on its side. Her breath caught. Harlan? Her voice cracked like dry wood. He's not here. Within seconds, the peaceful backyard erupted into chaos. Harlan sprinted to the shed, circled it twice, then pushed through the tall grass toward the tree line. Elias! Elias! His shouts tore through the stillness, sharp and desperate. Joran began to cry. Cora stood frozen, clutching her unfinished daisy chain, her knuckles white. Margaret rose slowly, her knitting falling to the ground. He wouldn't go into the woods, she whispered. He knows better. But the truth was undeniable. The boundary line marked by the old stump had been crossed. A trail of crushed ferns and disturbed soil led directly into the trees. And then, abruptly, the trail ended, as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. Neighbors arrived within minutes. Sheriff Dale Mercer, a man with salt and pepper hair and a slow, deliberate way of speaking, arrived with 2 deputies and a German shepherd named Rex. Search teams fanned out through the forest, calling Elias's name, their flashlights cutting beams through the thinning light. Volunteers joined in local hunters, school teachers, even the postman, Mr. Havelock, who had delivered mail on Hemlock Lane for 32 years. They searched all night, they searched the next day, they dragged the creek behind the property, combed abandoned mining shafts half a mile east, checked every cabin and trailer within a 10-mile radius. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors beating the air like frantic wings. Nothing. No footprints beyond the initial trail, no clothing snagged on branches, no signs of struggle, no ransom note, no suspicious vehicles reported. Elias Thornwood had simply ceased to exist, 20 feet from the people who loved him most. The investigation stretched for months. FBI agents reviewed grainy security footage from a gas station 3 miles away useless. Psychics were consulted, though Sheriff Mercer rolled his eyes and called them noisemakers. Tips poured in, some credible, most not. A woman in Spokane claimed she saw a boy matching Elias's description boarding a Greyhound bus with a man in a brown coat. Another caller said he'd seen a van parked near the forest edge around 3:15 that day, engine running, windows tinted, but no license plate, no confirmation. And then, silence. Years passed. The missing posters yellowed and peeled from telephone poles, the search parties disbanded, the case file grew thick with dead ends and unanswered questions, eventually labeled inactive by the county office. Yet, the Thornwoods never stopped looking. Lila kept Elias's room exactly as it was, blue walls with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, a toy truck overturned on the rug, a book splayed open on the bed. Every birthday, she lit a candle. Every Christmas, she placed a present under the tree with his name on it. Harlan quit his job at the garage and spent weekends hiking deep into the bitterroots, carving markers into trees, whispering his son's name into the wind. Cora, once a carefree girl with wildflower crowns and scraped knees, grew into a woman haunted by memory. She studied forensic anthropology at the University of Montana, determined to understand how someone could vanish without a trace. She wrote letters to missing persons databases, compared Elias's case to others, especially those in national parks or remote areas. That's when she stumbled upon something unsettling. There were patterns. Boys, mostly between the ages of 8 and 12, disappeared near forests, often within sight of family, no evidence of abduction, no bodies ever recovered. Cases scattered across different states, Montana, Colorado, New Hampshire, West Virginia, but clustered strangely around protected wilderness areas, federal land, regions with limited surveillance. One researcher, David Paulides, had compiled dozens of these cases under a project he called Missing 411. When Cora read his work, her blood ran cold. Elias's disappearance fit the profile perfectly: daylight, proximity to family, sudden absence, lack of forensic evidence. Even the terrain matched: soft soil, dense canopy, poor cell reception. But why? What connected these children? Some theories surfaced: wild animals, though no claw marks, no remains; runaways, though none left notes or took belongings; foul play by strangers, yet no witnesses, no DNA. Others whispered about more troubling possibilities: coordinated abductions, underground networks, or something darker, something the official reports refused to acknowledge. Then came the rumors. Hunters in the Bitterroots spoke in hushed tones about figures seen deep in the woods, tall, unnaturally still, moving without sound. Old-timers recalled stories from native elders about the vanishing people, spirits said to dwell in the high timber, who took children who strayed too far. Some believed the forest itself had a consciousness, a hunger. Sheriff Mercer dismissed such talk. "Grief makes people see ghosts," he said once, leaning against his cruiser outside the diner on Main Street. "Truth is, sometimes bad things happen for no reason, and sometimes we never get answers." But Cora couldn't accept that. In the spring of 2016, 17 years after Elias vanished, she returned to Pine Hollow with a team of researchers and a drone equipped with thermal imaging. They scanned the forest floor, focusing on the area just beyond the stump. On the third day, the drone detected an anomaly, a shallow depression in the earth, roughly the size of a child, partially concealed by roots and moss. Soil samples revealed traces of human decomposition, but DNA testing yielded inconclusive results. Too degraded, too old. Still, it was something. That night, Cora sat on the porch of the old house, now weathered and quiet, rocking in her grandmother's chair. The stars blinked above, cold and distant. A breeze stirred the pines, whispering through the needles like voices just below hearing. And then, faintly, she heard it. A giggle, high-pitched, familiar. It came from the edge of the woods. She stood, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the darkness. "Elias?" she whispered. No answer, only the wind. But the next morning, nestled among the roots of the old oak, they found it a small wooden horse, hand-carved, one ear chipped. It had belonged to Elias. He'd carried it everywhere. It was gone the day he disappeared. Now it was back. No fingerprints, no footprints, just the toy, resting on a bed of pine cones as if placed there with care. The local news picked up the story briefly. "Ghostly return," read one headline. "Mystery deepens in cold case," said another. But soon, attention faded. Life moved on. Except for Cora. She now lives in Pine Hollow year-round, working from a home office filled with maps, photographs, and binders labeled Project Echo, her personal archive dedicated to unresolved disappearances. She gives lectures at universities, appears on podcasts, urges families to speak up, to question, to remember. And every October 14th, at precisely 3:28 in the afternoon, she walks to the edge of the woods, stands at the moss-covered stump, and calls her brother's name. Sometimes, she says, the wind answers. Other times, the silence is unbearable. But she continues, because as long as one person remembers, Elias Thornwood is not truly gone. And perhaps, just perhaps, he is waiting. Waiting for someone to finally listen. To finally look not just outward into the trees, but inward into the spaces between memory and myth, where truth sometimes hides in plain sight. Like a child behind a garden shed, smiling, counting down until someone finds him, or until the forest takes another.